I'm Türker Vardar. I've spent most of my career working with global organizations across complex environments. I've worked with senior leaders closely across regions to create better workplaces, to help them work better.
Tina Malaya, yeah, I'm founder of Bevel. We work with international businesses. We provide the consultancy on self and team leadership and people insights and strategy to understand why certain things are happening and why the performance is not happening on the level that it should be. We work with teams, and practically we use the Enneagram methodology to assess the personality and the dynamics and the communication styles in the teams. We run team buildings, team of sites, online as well. And we are very much about the gender inclusive leadership in the organization while we deliver the soft skills training, soft skill development, self-confident networking, communication, and of course, precisely watching on the rise of female leadership in the international world.
Coming to the bit of the reality, what's happening now when we look at the global workforce data, there is a signal which is very hard to ignore, and it's around 88% of the employees are disengaged, and it's only around 13% of the employees are truly engaged. And that small engaged group is where innovation, ownership happens. And these are the people who do more than what's strictly required. So what this means, when engagement drops, it's not just a people issue, but it's directly affecting how organizations think, how they adapt, and how they execute. So these numbers raise an important question to us. So what is happening in these teams that pushes so many people into doing the basics, into doing just the minimum more? This data, it's a similar story as well. And nearly 9 out of 10 professionals, they report being stressed by their jobs, while fewer than 1 in 3 organizations have measures in place to address it. Stress is widely recognized by employees, but it's not always translated into concrete response at the organizational level. So we see this pressure showing up in behaviors. 62% of the employees are described as quiet quitting. And at the same time, 17% report having experienced burnout. And the estimated cost of this to the Swiss economy is 6.5 billion francs per year. And what is striking here is that these are not fringe cases. They represent a large part of the workforce. For example, in Switzerland, when we look at the cost of 1 day of absence to the employers, it's roughly around like 600 to 1,000 francs per employee. Once you account the lost productivity, the replacement effort, the operational disruption, all of these when taken into consideration. The impact is not just on financial, it's not on the money side. It affects the delivery, it affects the handovers, the decision speed, and more importantly, it impacts the trust within the teams. So reading numbers like these, we felt it's not enough to state at the report level. So that's why we wanted to understand how leaders themselves experience this shift in their decision making, in collaboration, and how their teams actually operate on a day-to-day level. Reality, what we are hearing is market pressure is reshaping the daily work. And what leaders consistently described was not one single pressure, but the stacking of pressures. So it's reorganizations, it's tighter budgets, the regulatory complexity, pipeline uncertainties, AI adoption, obviously. But none of these are new on their own. What feels different now is how frequently these changes are happening and how little time teams have to stabilize between these issues. When the pressure builds, leaders repeatedly ranked clarity and communication as the first things to erode before trust followed. And expectations become implicit rather than explicit. And they see, and that what they say is that the decisions are either rushed or deferred. They just cannot make decisions. Meetings multiplied as a way to manage the uncertainty, but this came as with a problem. Many of them describing is that their teams are fully booked weeks ahead, with little time left to actually do their own work. When we ask them on the day to day what they are seeing, what they are experiencing, very similar behaviors came up. The first one is related to the communication. They said it becomes more transactional, and people are focusing on their own corridor of responsibility. They share less, and collaboration turns into just coordination. That we are becoming expert at just surviving the week. But what is interesting here is that these are not motivation problems. These are more adaptive responses to the pressure that they are facing. Leaders spoke a lot about moving from coaching and sense making towards more monitoring, tracking, or just an escalation point. So the transparency, the emotional steadiness, and clear framing were consistently cited as the behaviors that help their teams most. Leaders questioned whether they address what people are actually struggling with. There's a gap between the technical upskilling and the support for how people relate, how they decide, or how they manage the pressure. People are promoted, but they are promoted to manage without being helped to manage people. Uncertainty dominated the conversation. AI came up often, not surprising. Performance will increasingly depend on relational skills. Whenever pressure comes, it narrows the focus. So silos harden, people go back into their silos, and they share less, they collaborate less, and they just default to their own functional lens. We looked at the jobs to be done for each of these. For example, in the frequent reorganizations, this is not redesigning the organizational charts again and again, or this is more stabilizing the teams, creating clarity around the roles, making the decisions right, and prioritization, so that people know where to focus, even when the structures changed. The budget cautiousness, when the resources are tight, which is happening currently, the job shifts from maintaining engagement without relying on incentives or new programs. How to keep their people motivated, aligned, and accountable, while asking the team members to do more with less resources. With the roles changing and skills becoming obsolete even faster and faster, the real job is redesigning the trust, especially around autonomy, the hybrid work, how to give the feedback and development of the individuals, because people want to feel trusted and relevant. They don't want to be monitored, and they don't want to feel also that they are replaceable, like from one day to another. If we look at all of these, actually these are not HR initiatives. These are day-to-day leadership jobs that are directly affecting how decisions are made and how work is actually is getting done.
There is always the starting point of diagnosing from the available data and the pulses you have of what exactly is the challenge, where is the bottleneck, what is the problem. And by running the interviews or quantitative studies, we can figure out what brings this rework, mistakes, and duplications of projects in the workplace. The assessing trust through the communication, assessing the behaviors and change the behaviors that actually influence the stress level is another thing as the step 2 towards the framework that you can implement in order, again, to improve the performance, to improve the employee engagement that impacts your business results, particularly in 2026. Why people feel detached from the organization, why they don't belong anymore. Breaking silos, creating transparency, trust, tailored communication, and collaboration styles. This is something that needs to be assessed to build trust on how actually you enhance. Sharing openly, I mentioned already in the beginning, to run the leadership workshops, team buildings, team development programs, even online, when people have the possibility to sit together and to say something that really relates, that they are not comfortable to say in normal organizational setting, being overwhelmed with the number of tasks and meetings they're going through on a daily basis, right? So dragging them out of that environment and saying, tell me what's happening, what you feel, what you think, and how we can make it together is another big milestone. And if you put it in the pipeline in the consistent way that people see that you own your leadership, you own your team, or if we are talking to HR people who are working with the department heads, the leadership top down and bottom up, balanced together. This is an important step to do in order to create this inclusive, transparent, authentic dialogue between the employees and their leaders in order to improve the team performance for the year. The performance is still under the threat because there should be very clear roadmap that actually point by point, step by step, will be able to measure very clearly the KPIs you are going to achieve with your team. Starting implementing this process already reached up to 40% of the optimization of the defects in the work your employees are doing, reworks, mistakes, cross-collaborational clashes, absenteeism, when people, because of the demotivation and disengagement, just don't come to work. Understanding what drives that attitude and the demotivation, what behaviors on the leadership and managerial side, what the stress levels and influencing factors, this you can easily decrease by 30%. And the turnover, when you understand clearly what is the number of voluntary leaves you have in the organization, which is normally, let's say, around 10%, but probably you have no idea what is number of hidden turnover when people are constantly thinking to change the job, and you easily increase the productivity of your workforce by 10%.